section of today. Without any further delays, can I take apologies?
Morning, and thank you, Chair. Just the following apologies. Honorable Lorimer and Honorable Madokwe, Chair, who's unable to attend the meeting. Those are the apologies received, Chair.
You said, there was a little bit of a disturbance. Can you repeat, Ari? I had Honorable Lorimer, but I couldn't hear the next person.
Yeah, both Honorable Lorimer and Honorable Madokwe, Chair. Those are the apologies received.
Okay. Thank you very much. With the other apology, I'm sure everyone or anyone who is in this meeting around here will share the same possible incoming experience. I might be load shedded at 10 o'clock, but I'm sure because it's presentations, the presentations will be able to continue to. There's load shedding, but I hope I'll be able to continue and participate between 10 and 12. Without any further delays on the presentations, can you flag the agenda, Ari or Ayanda? Honourable members, we will be dealing with a presentation on the Upstream Petroleum Resources and Resources Development Bill. The first to make such presentations will be OPASA, which is from 5 past, and hopefully I'm just left with to 25 past, and then it will be Sawoka, and then it will be Green Connection, and then we will take questions of clarity, not comments. And then we will then get responses. After that, we'll take presentations from Imbokodo, and then natural justice, and then oceans economy, and subsequently it will be the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, and then we'll take questions of clarity. Without any further delay, before I give to the presenters, the reason I said we will be asking questions of clarity is simple because members of the committee will get an opportunity after they have been clarified to express their views and opinions as members of the committee subject to presentations that will be made. So we have got no intentions to contest or question the views of individual organizations as they present today. Secondly, I will appreciate the fact that where organizations would have submitted presentations and there have been small areas of or some changes, those we must allow them to do so, but please take us through what could have been the areas where there are changes in the presentation or where there are some more emphasis or expression on those views. Without any further delays, can I give in to, is it Opasa? Ne?
Correct, Chair.
Yes, can I give in to Opasa from now until 28 minutes past 9 o'clock. Opasa?
Chair, just before that, can they just indicate to whom I must give co-hosting rights?
Yeah, that one is your administrative arrangement.
They must just indicate, Chair.
Okay.
Ray Kavanagh speaking here. I'm still trying to join the meeting as I have the co-hosting rights. I would be grateful if you could let me in if you can see me trying to come in. Otherwise, we do have the presentation slides ready on behalf of Professor Dale, but I can see I'm joining the meeting on my side.
So can I give the co-hosting rights to the professor, or are we still waiting for you?
It says that I'm joining the meeting now. I'm not sure what you can see from your side. If
Nothing, you're not even in the waiting room. Nothing, you're not even in the waiting room.
Then I would suggest if you could please provide co-hosting rights to Professor Dale, and I'll present on his screen as well as he speaks.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Where is the prof now?
He's second from the left.
No. There you go.
You're on mute already.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yes, proceed.
Mr. Chair, the chairperson of OPASA, Ms. Siane, will open for us.
Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning, members. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Masego Siane, and I'm the interim chair of OPASA, that's the Offshore Petroleum Association of South Africa. I'm not standing alone today. I've got a team that's been delegated as members of OPASA to represent us at this session that we've been awaiting for quite a while. And I'm very thankful for this opportunity to provide our comments and have been eagerly anticipating this day. Together with me is Dr. Alison Fata, and she represents Total Energies, and she also wears the hat.
Recording in progress.
She also wears the hat of our chairperson as OPASA Tax and Finance chairperson. Also representing our delegation today is Mr. Jan Meyer, who's as a member from Africa Energy. And together with us, there's just been a brief introduction, our Norton Rose team, and that's Prof. Michael Dale and Andrea on the side, Kavanagh. Many of you will recall the journey through this bill has come a long way. We have come through the Operation Pakisa Oceans Economy, and for the longest of time, all we have been basically agreeing to is that we look for outcomes that ultimately grow this industry of ours that is very nascent in its stage, but also has got a lot of potential. And that said, in all policies that are written, we always commit ourselves to ensuring that we raise the unintended consequences of any policy that is put forth that could lead to counterintuitive approaches to dealing with the growth of this industry, and also just making it difficult for the industry to thrive, which may lead to us as a destination for petroleum resources not being the most competitive compared to other jurisdictions that investors look to play into. With that said, I think it's probably a good time just to give a bit of background in terms of who OPASA is. As mentioned, OPASA is the Offshore Petroleum Association of South Africa. And you'd see on the screen being beamed, there's 10 member companies. And I represent Sasol in my day-to-day capacity as a policy specialist. There's Africa Energy, there's Petro SA, there's Sasol, CNR International, Impact Oil and Gas. You've just moved, Andrea. If you could just go back to the slide that shows members. Because I just want to make sure that I don't leave out any of our members. Like I said, there's 10 members, and there's Sunbird Energy, Sesigen, and then Total Energies, Shell, and Sasol. So we look forward to this presentation. We look forward to the discussions that will take place. We've made a number of submissions, and maybe just to add, Dr. Ellison Fata will be representing OPASA in the latter slide, latter part of this discussion through the Oceans Economy BE conversation, which is further to our submission as OPASA in terms of our commitment and the frank conversations that we believe are important in terms of growing the upstream oil and gas industry. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to hand over now to Prof. Dale. Prof. Dale.
Thank you, Ms. Siane. Good morning, Honourable Chair and Honourable members. Thank you very much for the opportunity for us to deliver oral submissions, which are of course complementary to the written submissions that Total has already made. The topics for today are on the screen, so I'll immediately go on to the next slide. By way of introduction, OPASA and its members thank the draft persons who prepared the bill, very comprehensive and carefully drafted bill. A positive feature in which is the new form of petroleum right, which covers exploration and production from cradle to grave. Necessarily, a replacement bill always creates a bit of uncertainty, and this bill too is no exception in that it provides for conversions of existing rights, which provide an opportunity for new interference by third parties, and it also has a multiplicity of administrative decisions which again provide an opportunity for third parties at each twist and turn. We'll come back to those in slide 1, the transitional provisions. The main issue there is that the bill provides for conversions of existing rights rather than for continuance, which then gives an opportunity for third parties to intervene in that process. And of course, preservation of existing rights is paramount to OPASA's members, since they hold exploration rights and have applied for production rights in some instances. So security and continuity of tenure is paramount, so that OPASA suggests that existing rights should in fact continue as before to preserve the security of tenure, which is an object of the bill. There are two ancillary notes. The one that item 8 provides for lapsing of exploration rights which are not converted, whereas item 3 provides that once the holder has applied for a production right, the exploration right continues. So those two items need to be reconciled. And similarly, there's an item providing that converted production rights The terms are terms with the necessary changes, whereas another item provides for continuance of terms and conditions. So again, those two need to be reconciled. Slide 2 deals with administrative procedures. Of course, the bill contains a multiplicity of administrative procedures, each time notice to and an opportunity consultation with third parties needs therefore to happen, opening the door again for intervention by third parties. So where possible, OPASA submits that there should be a reduction in the number of administrative decisions. As to ancillary items, there should be a clause providing for decisions to be taken within a stipulated period. Some clauses do, some clauses don't. And then secondly, that there should be provision for extensions and combinations of periods for applicants or holders to do things like in the National Environmental Management Act. And lastly, there should be direct appeal to the minister, not the two-level appeal system, first to the Director General and then to the minister. And appeals should have to be lodged within 30 days of the decision, not of the appellant becoming aware of the decision, which of course caused difficulty in the sustaining the Wild Coast cases. The third topic is overlapping competences. We've, in the written submissions, identified various examples of overlapping competences which are really conferred on other organs of state, and we've listed them there: mine, health and safety, geoscience, information, environmental matters, determination of tariffs and money bills. Obviously the detail appears in the written submissions, and the request again is that overlapping competences or ultra vires competences such as money bills should be removed. Then we come to the topic in slide 4 of empowerment, which has two parts to it. The first, the participation by empowerees. As we know, the bill provides a minimum of 10%, which can be extended if one can't find an empoweree, so one extension of up to 2 years. But even after that, it may be difficult to find an investor because, of course, offshore exploration is hugely expensive, risky, and has a long lead time to it. So the request is for multiple extensions of long, with the possibility of each extension being for longer than 2 years. The second topic deals with exit of empowerees. There's recognition of empowerment even on exit, but it's subject to provisos which delete the once empowered, always empowered recognition in the Chamber of Mines case and the Minerals Council case. So PASA requests the deletion of the proviso so that there will be full recognition even after exit. Two ancillary items, the clause refers only to exit during production and should also refer to exit during exploration. And secondly, one of the provisos deals with vesting of 50% of net value. PASA suggests that the meaning of net value be clarified. Slide 5 deals briefly with state participation of a fixed 20%, which may sterilize some projects. So the request is simply that
Prof. Dale?
the state participation. Yes.
Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt you. There's a message on the side. People are basically complaining about your audibility. You're not as audible. If you could just speak closer to the mic, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So the request is that state participation be up to 20%. In other words, the State Petroleum Company would have an option to decide on 20% or less. Slide 6, the licensing mechanisms, two issues there. The application procedure provides only for licensing rounds, whereas OPASA submits that it should additionally provide for voluntary applications as currently in the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act. The second topic is about the compulsory requirement of notarial execution within 30 days with one extension of 30 days, failing which the right lapses. Now that's, firstly, the period is too short because you need diagrams and all sorts of things for execution. But secondly, lapsing is contrary to security of tenure. And after all, notarial execution is just a formality leading to registration, which benefits the holder. So the first request is longer period be provided with multiple extensions, but secondly, that lapsing be deleted in favor of the minister relying on the breach provision in clause 88. An ancillary issue there that appeals suspend notarial execution. The request is the opposite, that appeals not suspend notarial execution. Slide 7 deals with acceptance by the agency of the successful applicant in competitive licensing rounds. That's, of course, a hugely important decision to decide who the applicant is who will go through. Acceptance is different in voluntary or open applications because there the first come, first served principle would apply, where it does not here, where there is simply a choice. And the suggestion is that the minister be the person who decides on the successful applicant in a competitive licensing round. The 8th topic, very briefly, the bill provides that holders have to be incorporated in South Africa, but many are incorporated in foreign companies and simply register as external companies here in terms of the Companies Act. So OPASA requests that a provision also be made for registration as an external company. The 9th topic, review of terms of petroleum rights, whereby the minister has the power to review terms. That, of course, is contrary to continuity of tenure if the minister cannot intervene at any stage, and it's a disincentive to investment. So this is the one area where it's suggested that this clause be deleted, and that an empowering provision for stability agreements be inserted as in the Income Tax Act, the Royalty Act, and as in the Standard Clause 30 in exploration rights. That's, of course, an international investment requirement stability. Slide 10, appraisal before declaration of commerciality. The bill provides for compulsory appraisal before a declaration of commercial discovery, but the holder may already know without appraisal that there is a commercial discovery, and therefore OPASA suggests that appraisal be optional, not compulsory. Slide 11, postponement of development. The minister may in the national interest postpone development. Of course, hugely negative consequences for the holder, contrary to security of tenure, to investment, and to the work program, which has already been approved, of course, by the minister. So the request is that the agreement of the holder should be required on any postponement of development, and that the meaning of national interest be clarified. The 12th topic is the manner of conducting, whereby the agency may direct increase or decrease of the rate of production. Again, that's contrary to security of tenure, to investment, and to the already approved work program. So this is the second area where OPASA requests the deletion of the relevant clause. Slide 13, third-party access, whereby the agency may direct use of facilities. The problem there is that the consent of the holder should be required, and this really constitutes an expropriation of use, which requires compensation in terms of the Constitution. And furthermore, the request is that tariffs and conditions should not be capable of determination by the agency. All of this should occur by agreement. Slide 14 on constitutionality. In the written submissions, OPASA has given examples of unconstitutionality, money bill provisions, expropriation without compensation, vagueness, and contravention of international trade agreements, for example, in regard to the strategic stock obligations. We respectfully request that members have regard to the written submissions. And then finally, Honourable Chair and members, in slide 15, we simply request you to have detailed regard to the written submissions, to which these oral submissions are simply complementary. Thank you again for your attention, and I take pleasure in yielding back to Ms. Seane.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the chairperson and members for giving us this opportunity to once again contribute to this co-development of the Petroleum Bill, and to seeing it through to becoming an act that is workable, an act that will allow and enable the growth of the upstream petroleum industry. With that said, Chair, I'd like to hand over to you, and once again, thank you.
Thank you very much. What a good example. Just exactly with an extra minute, 1 minute extra that is left. Without spoiling it, can I then give who's next, Ari? And Sauga, can you come in up until 10 to? Just put time your watch up to 10 to 10.
Good morning, Honourable Chair and members. Honourable members, thank you for the opportunity. Can you see my slide? I'm assuming so.
Yes, we see it.
Excellent. Thank you. So we have made a submission on the same topic to this committee earlier, a couple of years ago. So this is supplementary to that submission, and also supplementary to the written submission that we've made. SAHOGA is about helping South Africa Inc. to optimize economic opportunity as an industry body. We promote network capacity building, do capacity building and lobbying. And then we also particularly focus on developing the upstream and complementary midstream and downstream oil and gas industry in South Africa. We believe that there is huge opportunity. We have around 150 member companies that we represent. Firstly, I would like to focus on some of the challenges related to the oil and gas industry, and end off with some recommendations pertaining to the bill. It is important for South Africa to present a case reinforcing the attractiveness of our industry for investment. It is particularly important to have legislative and regulatory certainty. So some of the challenges that we are experiencing is around attractiveness to investors, and particularly highlighted is legislative and regulatory uncertainty. And we need to work hard to get to the point where we send out the message that we are open for business in South Africa in terms of the oil and gas upstream industry. We need to continue to do capacity building. We're often very short-term focused, and we don't look at the long term. Lack of a shared vision, particularly if you look at the different role players in the energy sector, We should work on achieving a shared vision as to how to optimize the opportunities in the upstream oil and gas industry. And then a very important point at the end there is that gas is often overlooked as a source of energy in the just energy transition. And that is so important given that the European Union has declared gas as a green source of energy. We see gas as a very, very important part of the energy transition to net zero. We all want to achieve net zero as soon as possible, but we have to bear in mind that it is not an event, it is a process, and we need to pace ourselves to achieve that. Some of the opportunities we want to highlight. South Africa is underexplored as a country, so we have lots of resources under the earth that we need to tap into. We need employment creation if we take into account the challenges that we're experiencing with unemployment in the country. It is a no-brainer to make sure that we utilize the resources that we've been blessed with. Skills Hub in Southern Africa needs to be continued to develop, and exploration success in South Africa is certainly going to be an important part of developing that skills up. We have skills and we can continue to develop those. And also in a Southern African perspective, we can support Southern Africa to really develop into a strong oil and gas and energy strong region with greater energy security than what we've got at the moment. We're able to decrease the input costs for manufacturing and industrialization. It's important to mention that we need to enhance our energy security. We can see this with power outages that we're currently experiencing. We can see the issues in Europe at the moment around energy security, and we need to, in the long term, develop greater and enhanced energy security, and gas exploration for gas certainly will help us do that. Competitive labor costs, save on feedstocks. We won't be dependent solely on imports for our energy feedstock. The government offtake benefit, we need to highlight Southern African complementary regional opportunities, we've said earlier. And then the discoveries like Brulpadda, Luiperd, and regional finds in Namibia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe as well, are certainly catalytic, and we need to make use of the window of opportunity afforded to us at this point. We must seize the moment. Gas to power is a sustained supply perspective. So we certainly, if we want a sustained supply of energy and power, gas to power is an option to consider. Skills pivoting from mining, we certainly do not start from zero, and I'm conscious of the time pressure of this presentation. And then lastly, but not the least, some of the urgent priorities that we need to focus on is to remove the legislative uncertainties. And I think we're well on our way to do that. The drafting team did a great job at, I think, listening to the inputs in the past, working that into the new revised version, and we now have to get on to make this happen. And we want to commend Parliament and the Portfolio Committee on Energy for taking this forward and treating this with the urgency that it deserves. It's important to create an attractive exploration proposition for companies. If they don't see an attractive proposition in South Africa, they will go elsewhere. So they do not have to explore in South Africa if it's too difficult, if it's too complex to negotiate, and if it's too uncertain, they will go elsewhere where there's less of a challenge and where there's greater certainty. Flexibility, and this is a very important point, in the provision for the 20% carried state interest and the minimum of 10% black participation. We've consulted on this with our members, and a suggestion came forward that it should ideally be changed to, instead of being very specific on 20% and 10%, it should read up to 20% and up to 10% respectively. So we also need more clarity on the transitional arrangements and timelines related to current license holders. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members and honorable chair, we want to thank you for this opportunity to present our case to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a record time. I doubt there's someone who will break this record. I can assure you. Who's next? The
Green Connection, Chair.
Green Connection, can you come in until 10 o'clock?
Thank you, Chair, and honorable members. My name is Kolwan Simelane. I represent the Green Connection as the advocacy officer. First and foremost, this is my introduction, and then Adrian Paul will go into the nitty-gritties of the entire presentation. We as the Green Connection have noted the committee's efforts in continuing to engage civil society on different challenges and changes the department seeks to implement, be it on a policy or even legislative level. We are pleased to be granted the opportunity to present to you on our comments with regards to the Upstream Petroleum Resource Development Plan. We are of the notion that the bill promotes the acceleration of oil and gas and exploration production during a time when we need policies that are just and fair, like the Just Energy Transition, which aims to decarbonize and move away from fossil fuels, thus moving into cleaner energy sources. As MPs, you need to ensure and uphold the interests of the affected communities, which should be the driving force towards sustainable development. The decision to pass this bill should encompass and conscious the needs of the people, since we are the nation that embodies Batupili principle. The bill continues to neglect global and national scientific evidence, researcher findings, activists' actions and reports, and coastal communities' opinions on the climate issue. We have not seen the catastrophic events happening in South Africa, not only South Africa, but globally, due to unsustainable weather patterns and conditions? We need to be cognizant of the repercussions which will be caused by passing this bill. One of the role of MPs is to hold the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy to account, and that it does not continue to neglect coastal communities' voices, or entirely the voices of the people. The Green Connection believes that oil and gas is not part of the future of South Africa, but moreover, unsustainable for a just transition. and that passing this bill in its current form is a bad idea. We remain firm on the notion that our fossil fuel resources should be left in the ground so that we do not further exacerbate climate change. We must think of alternative ways which will not harm the environment, but more importantly, not threaten the livelihoods of the small-scale fishers who depend on the oceans, as this is their only way of life. We are totally against the destruction of the ocean. We are no longer going to cover up ourselves in shells. We need to think beyond petroleum. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to give over to my colleague, Adrian Paul, to take over.
Thank you very much, Kulwani, and thank you to the Honourable Committee and the Chair for this opportunity to provide this presentation. I assume that the presentation is visible to all. Can I just confirm that, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Adrian Paul. I'm an attorney representing the Green Connection. And these submissions are made on behalf of the Green Connection, basically providing a short overview of some of the main points made. Firstly, just to focus on the some of the objects of the bill, or the objects of the Act or the bill. Section 2I makes provision for giving effect to Section 24 of the Constitution. By ensuring that the nation's petroleum resources are developed, and I emphasize the word developed, in an orderly and ecologically sustainable manner, while promoting justifiable economic and social development. We just highlight that object because on the face of it, it appears to be somewhat in conflict with Section 24, which focuses on the protection of the environment rather than the development of resources. Although, of course, the development of resources can happen in a way that is compliant or is complementary to the Constitution, but focusing on the development, we believe is a concern. Section 2J makes it clear that the one of the main objects of the Act is to, or of the bill, is to accelerate exploration and production and to maximize the economic recovery of petroleum for the benefit of the people of South Africa. Obviously, it's within that context that this presentation is made. Our main concern, as Kulwani mentioned in the introduction, relates to obviously climate change, but also in particular to the climate crisis, as well as other impacts that offshore oil and gas development in particular, as well as onshore development, can have for the environment, ocean economies, and functioning ecosystems. We'd just like to highlight some of the statements made in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report, which include that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, oceans and land, resulting in widespread climate changes, that the scale of these changes is, of recent changes, is unprecedented. Climate change is already affecting and intensifying many weather and climate extremes, from floods, heat waves, tropical cyclones, and the like. The report emphasizes that deep cuts in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions are required to limit global warming to the desired targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial limits. And the report also acknowledges the need to limit carbon and methane emissions to limit global warming. Methane emissions in particular, over a 20-year period, are estimated as being about 82.5% more impactful than CO2 emissions over the equivalent period. The same panel on the 9th of August 2021 pointed out that unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees Celsius will be impossible to achieve. It will be beyond reach. And then the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has also made some comments relating to the climate crisis and the AR6 report, noting that it's nothing less than a code red for humanity, that the alarm bells are deafening, and that the evidence of climate change or global warming is irrefutable. He's also pointed out that climate activists are sometimes pointed or depicted as dangerous radicals, but that the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels, and points out that investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness. Guterres is also on record as stating that investing in fossil fuels now is a dead end, both economically and environmentally. At the COP26 last year, the parties recognized the climate crisis again and the urgent need to increase efforts to address climate change. Again, there was alarm expressed that human activities have already resulted in global warming of around 1.1 degrees Celsius, and that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius will require rapid, deep, and sustained reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions, including a 45% reduction in carbon dioxide levels by 2030 relative to the 2010 levels, and also to net zero by around the mid-century. The parties to the COP26 were called upon to accelerate transition to low emission energy systems, basically clean power generation and energy efficiency measures, and also the COP expressed the need to protect natural ecosystems, including marine ecosystems, to act as sinks and reservoirs for greenhouse gases. The International Energy Agency in July 2021 put out a net zero report, which was basically depicting their pathway towards achieving net zero by 2050. South Africa is an associate member, as we understand it, of the IEA. In its report, the IEA stated that to have a fighting chance of reaching net zero by 2050 requires nothing short of a total transformation of the energy systems that underpin our economies. They pointed out that there's no need in their pathway for investment in new fossil fuel supply, and that beyond projects already committed as of 2021, in their pathway, no new oil and gas fields are required. In South Africa, of course, we have the climate change bill that is currently before Parliament. While it's not without its issues, we point out that no mention of the climate change bill is made in the current Upstream Petroleum bill, and there appears to be no attempt to align this current bill with the climate change bill. And in particular, there doesn't appear to be any reference to sectoral targets that will be set for the petroleum resource sector. We'd just like to also highlight some of South Africa's international climate change commitments, which again are not mentioned in the bill. South Africa is of course a party to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which enjoins state parties to take precautionary measures to anticipate, prevent, and minimize the causes of climate change. South Africa, of course, ratified the Kyoto Protocol and adopted the Paris Agreement, and is committed to working with others to ensure that temperature increases are kept well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with the actual target now being 1.5 degrees Celsius by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In accordance with this, South Africa has developed nationally determined contributions, which again aren't mentioned in the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Bill. Our first intended national determined contribution, or NDC, was submitted in 2015, and an update with more ambitious mitigation targets was submitted in 2021. President Ramaphosa, at a statement at the UN Climate Change Conference recently on the 9th of November, stated that South Africa is fully committed to achieving the most ambitious end of the mitigation range in our updated NDCs. And within this context, it's important to note that the energy sector contributes about 84% of our overall greenhouse gas emissions, which include, of course, carbon dioxide and methane. And those energy systems are, of course, primarily based on fossil fuels. South Africa has also developed a low emissions development strategy in accordance with its international commitments. That strategy states that South Africa is one of the top 20 global greenhouse gas emitters. We'll need, and with a high dependency on fossil fuels, we'll need to make substantial emission cuts to contribute to its fair share to global greenhouse gas emission reductions. And in line with this, we wish, as the Green Connection, to point out that the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Bill does not seem to address how future greenhouse gas emissions resulting from the exploitation and use of oil and gas that may be discovered through accelerated exploration and production of petroleum will impact on South Africa's ability to achieve its greenhouse gas emission targets. We'd like to highlight that there is a risk of oil and gas investments being made, bearing in mind that it can take up to 10 years to reach the production stage. There's a concern that investments could become stranded assets as well as a burden to future generations. In other words, creating an entire gas industry, for example, which may in the future become redundant or well, redundant given the climate crisis, could result in the need for another transition dealing with people who are then about to lose their jobs and things like that. There's also a concern that there's been no accounting for externalized socioeconomic consequences of carbon emissions that would arise from the burning or use of any oil and gas discovered and produced. And there's also concern that the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Bill in its current form basically serves the vested interests of multinational and domestic companies who, of course, are seeking to profit from exploitation of fossil fuels. There's been a lot in the media recently about massive profits that have been made by oil and gas companies, and that underscores that point. In line with this, the Green Connection submits that in the context of the climate crisis, the unconstrained and accelerated exploration and production, exploration for and production of petroleum resources is not ecologically sustainable development and use of natural resources, and does not constitute justifiable economic and social development as required by, in our view, Section 24 of the Constitution. The Green Connection submits that the bill should be clear of Africa's international climate change commitments and, of course, its own domestic bills and policies, and that the bill should provide an appropriate framework for a rapid and just transition away from fossil fuel extraction, production, and use, and towards ecologically sustainable renewable energy. Other comments that we had related to the expanded role of, for example, the Petroleum Agency of South Africa. There's concern that these functions provided for in the bill are sometimes conflicting. They include decision-making powers, both granted in terms of the bill, or that would be granted in terms of the act if it's passed, as well as delegated powers. The minister is empowered to delegate to the chief executive officer of PASA, as well as to any officer. It has technical advisory functions, as well as functions to formulate exploration and license allocation strategies. It has its usual role of receiving and processing applications and making recommendations to the minister for permits and rights. But it also has monitoring and enforcement of compliance functions, which we believe would be best served by an agency that had more independence and no conflict of interest. In other words, it's difficult to reconcile an agency that has as its basis the promotion of offshore oil and gas exploration and production with its regulatory functions. Moving on to the mandatory powers or obligations of the minister, is concern that, as with the MPRDA, or Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act, that certain provisions oblige or require the minister to grant, for example, a reconnaissance permit, that's Section 39, under certain circumstances, as well as a petroleum right. where the prescribed conditions are met. With regards to public participation, we note, or the Green Connection notes, that Section 19 requires PASA to call on interested and affected parties to comment and object to specified applications. But once again, as with the current bill or the current act, there's no requirement for certain applications or sufficient information to be provided to interested and affected parties to inform their comments. There appears to be no requirement for notice to include appropriate forms of notice to rural or historically disadvantaged communities, such as small-scale fishers that could be affected by the offshore oil and gas exploration as well as production, that there's no requirement to notify such parties of any decisions. And we also point out that while Section 20 includes notification requirements and consultation requirements in respect of landowners, occupiers, and any affected parties, the term affected party is not defined, and we believe that it should be and should include coastal communities, small-scale fishers and fishing-dependent communities specifically. Other concerns, very briefly, and I'm coming to an end here, include the concept of frontier areas. As within the context of climate change and the need to move away from fossil fuels. These provisions, of course, are aligned more with accelerating and increasing or promoting fossil fuel exploration and production. So there's requirements for PASA to designate any areas, blocks that where there's no or limited knowledge as frontier. That seems to perpetuate this open season for further unconstrained petroleum resource development and appears to be in tension with the need to phase out fossil fuel exploration and production in accordance with South Africa's international climate change commitments. There's also a concern relating to funding. Section 11 deals or makes provision for funding provisions, including new methods such as including application fees and the proceeds of sales from petroleum geodata. The Green Connection again submits that this appears to be in tension with some of its other functions, such as evaluating permits, monitoring, enforcement, and the like. We'd also finally just like to highlight some concerns relating to consultation on the bill. From the Green Connection's point of view, there does not seem to have been meaningful consultation. The commenting period was too short, given the length and technical complexity of the bill. The Green Connection certainly only heard about it on about 2 days before the deadline. And there's also concern that many of the small-scale fishers and fishing-dependent communities that the Green Connection works with and who depend on the oceans for their livelihoods and could be adversely affected do not appear to have been specifically consulted or given a meaningful opportunity to engage on the bill. Those communities, of course, lack electronic resources and find it difficult to access the internet, virtual conferences like this. And as far as we know, there's been no notification through community notices, radio, or TV. In other words, alternative ways of bringing the bill to the attention of those communities. And that brings our short presentation to an end. Thank you once again, Honourable Chair and Committee, for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Green Connection. Is there somebody else, Ari, or we take questions of clarity from members? Yes, I assume. Honorable members, it's just questions of clarity. Let's keep our views to ourselves. Questions of clarity so that when we do deliberations, we make deliberations not on distorted or assumed or misrepresented views or information. It's just to get that clarity so that members can be more informed as they do deliberations. Are there any questions of clarity, and they must be specific to which of the presenters that those questions of clarities are sought? Going one, going two, going three. Okay, there's none. Let me then, who's next, Ari?
Imbogodo, Chair.
Okay, Ish. As usual, like I said, you can see I'm in the darkness. Let me try though. Imbogodo.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Chairperson and members of the
I will hear
committee.
you.
Good morning, Chairperson, members of the committee and industry representatives. My name is Miranda Anthony, and I'm with Imbogodo Exploration and Production South Africa. And I'm joined in the meeting by my colleague Stephanie Mento, who's our COO, as well as our geologist, Sanelisiwe Mhlambi. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the committee for giving us this actual opportunity to present our comments to them. I'm going to share my screen. I am briefly going to first talk about Imbogodo, just for purpose of just understanding who we are and what we're about. Imbogodo is a South African oil and gas company established with the specific purpose of promoting meaningful and diverse economic ownership opportunities for historically disadvantaged South Africans. The company is managed and part owned by technically qualified Black women who are experienced in the working in the upstream and oil and gas industry, and we are supported by individuals with a wealth of industry expertise. We currently hold 2 onshore technical cooperation permits in highly prospective regions and are actively pursuing high quality offshore exploration assets. We are well funded and have the necessary capital in place to finance the acquisitions of assets and other operational requirements. We bring value in terms of our oil and gas expertise, our knowledge of local business, government, and especially the social and economic environment of the country in which we operate. I'm going to go through our comments briefly. We support the government's broad initiatives as prescribed in the bill. However, clear and definitive commercial terms is needed to ensure that there's an incentive for investment. We believe that the bill can provide an excellent basis to expand oil and gas exploration rapidly in South Africa, but we need an urgent and clear united mandate from the government to fast track and support the oil and gas industry. We support the government's initiatives in the bill to facilitate the entry of BE companies into the oil and gas industry. However, we require stricter governance thereof. We believe that proper and meaningful consultation with affected committees is required to ensure that their views are taken seriously, allowing potential benefits to flow to those who are impacted by the operations of the industry. Our recommendations: we need the bill enacted as soon as possible within the context of the relevant parliamentary protocols and processes. The inclusion of BE companies is critical to ensure locals participate in the industry. The upstream oil and gas should play a significant role in terms of the economic growth and development of the country economically by creating jobs and urgently addressing some of the socio-economic shortcomings that we face as a country. We also need to grow and broaden our levels of oil and gas skills expertise. I think there's a need for skills training to be ready for the industry to start. And we also believe that a strong and vibrant oil and gas industry can greatly assist in addressing the key socio-economic challenges that the country faces. Our presentation is very short. So I'd like to conclude, I'd just like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present our comments and wish the committee all the best in moving the bill to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I understand the meaning of Imbokodo. I was trying to grapple in my mind. Now I get the meaning. White Danshi.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Anthony. Who's next? Ayanda and Ari.
It's supposed to be Natural Justice Chair, but I doubt if they're on the platform, Chair, but you can just check.
Is Natural Justice on the platform? This is another record time presentation again. It's straight to the point. Is Natural Justice on the platform? If it's not, who is next?
Oceans Economy Task Team Chair.
Pardon?
Oceans Economy Task Team Chair.
Okay.
Chair, that's myself, Dr. Alison Fatah.
Oceans Economy Task Team, ne?
Yes, correct.
Okay, it's take us up until past.
Thank you. Just flight my presentation. Chair, at the start of flighting, I just want to highlight that the front page. Okay, sorry, I went into load shedding, my computer went down. We just put it into UPS. Okay, if I can confirm that you can see the presentation.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So I've just changed the front page of the presentation to reflect that the presentation is to the Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources and Energy. This presentation is on behalf of the Ocean Economy Task Team. The Ocean Economy Task Team is a run-off from Operation Pekisa, which concluded in 2014, making recommendations for activities or initiatives that could be introduced to fast-track the development of a sustainable ocean economy. One of the outcomes was a commitment to develop an ocean economy master plan. And for that purpose, several working groups were established. One of those working groups was working group number 5, which addresses offshore oil and gas activities. In terms of a sub-task team of that working group, there was a designation comprised of industry bodies, OPASA, which represents the offshore petroleum rights holders, SIOGA, which represents the service providers to the oil and gas industry, and CTC Global. So given this particular task, we were asked to make specific comment in relation to the incorporation of HDSA participation in terms of carried participation under the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Bill. Okay. What you'll see on screen is what we've actually presented. So what we've done is reference to the legislation itself, explained what our interpretation of that reference is, made comment in terms of whether or not that's appropriate use, and then we've proposed new wording in terms of the legislation. So not as to bore members of the Portfolio Committee, I will summarize very shortly what our concerns are. Presently, there's an allocation for 20% state participation in terms of the allocation of all oil and gas rights. That state participation is on a carried basis, which means that the other rights holders actually carry the proportionate share of the state in terms of its capital expenditure in relation to exploration and in relation to development of the field. There is a recovery for those carrying holders once the field itself reaches production, and at that point in time, 50% of the exploration costs will be recovered from production, and 100% of the development costs would be recoverable from production. The issue with HDSA is that presently there is an allocation of a minimum of 10% holding towards HDSA participants. That is not a carried participation, which means that the HDSA participants have to pay their way in relation to exploration activities and development of the field. This is particularly onerous for Black persons to fund that participation of exploration and development of the petroleum right. The reason is that it's very costly. We're talking billions of US dollars in terms of exploration, development up to production, okay, even when it's only 10% of that. And it's also very risky. So there is no assurance that you will actually make a commercially viable discovery and be successful in developing your field to the point that it will actually produce at economic quantities. For this reason, it is not possible to obtain funding from commercial lenders for Black participants. And essentially, it means that we need to find a mechanism to enable HDSA participation in terms of the oil and gas rights. There is currently provision made in the bill that of the 10% allocation for HDSA participation, it is possible to actually dilute that participation by 49%, by half, which will allow a capital or equity participant into the HDSA entity, which can assist with the funding. That in itself is still not enough, because that remaining 5%, even after dilution, that HDSA participant is having to pay for. So what we are proposing is that in terms of the state participation, we actually reduce that, make it an allocation of up to 15% for the state participation, still on the existing carried terms, and then allocate 5% towards HDSA, not increasing the current 10%, just that of the 10% that they are allocated, 5% will then be on a carried basis. In terms of that carry, which is then supported by the other JV partners or carrying holders, they will be required as HDSA to repay out of production 100% of the carry that they've received through exploration. Okay, remember for state it was only 50%, and for production, the development of the field. Okay. In addition to that, because the carried participation is in effect a loan by the other JV partners to the HDSA participant, we've also embedded an interest rate to compensate for the time value of money in relation to that loan. And so we've proposed the current secured overnight foreign settlement rate, or so far per annum, has been that embedded interest rate. Furthermore, because of the ability to actually dilute that 10% participation down to 5% to enable equity participation in the HDSA to accommodate funding, we're saying that in respect of that 5% carried interest that is now allocated towards HDSA, it is not possible to dilute that carried interest. So that will always be held in the hands of a Black person. Finally, in terms of the HDSA itself, we believe that there should be a specific designation of Black persons that would qualify for this carried interest, and potentially this could be implemented by way of regulation to benefit emerging BEEs, triple BEE participations versus established, potentially well-funded BEE participation. So being Black is not enough for this carried participation. We specifically want to bring into the sector and fund those people who are unable to secure the funding, yet should be participating in the allocation of oil and gas rights. Thank you, Chair. That is the conclusion of my submission.
Thank you very much. Ocean economy. I'm trying my level best. I'm still low shedded, so I had to make sure that at least I do what could help to be seen. Thank you. Exactly on time. Who's next, guys?
Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment here.
Okay. DFF, take us 20 past now, take us up to 22. Thank you very much.
Good day, Chair, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members. I am the Deputy Director General, Vanessa Benderman of DFFE. Chair, I am supported today by my team, the Chief Director for Law Reform and Policy Coordination, as well as the Directorate. My Director, Amanda van Heeren, will take us through the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson, Honourable Members. I am going to start both my videos so that you can just see my face and also to see my screen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present the presentation on behalf of the department. Now it seems like I can't put on my camera while I've got the presentation loaded. I should have probably done it in a different sequence. Is there perhaps confirmation that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Thank you. I will just move on to our input directly. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Honourable Chairperson, Honourable Members, membership organisations, and for the introduction. These are just a list of a couple of abbreviations that we might use in our slides, but I will try to explain these acronyms as we move through the presentation. Just as a bit of background, the One Environmental System for mining came into effect in 2014, and specifically Section 50A of the National Environmental Management Act deals with the details around this, and it relates to the different powers between the respective ministers of environment, water and mineral resources. And these three parties agreed that all the environmental related aspects for mining will from 2014 onwards be regulated through the National Environmental Management Act. So the consequences of that agreement was that any environmental provisions will be repealed from other legislation that affects mining, such as the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act. The Environment Minister is responsible for setting the regulatory framework in this respect, and the Minister of Mineral Resources implements this environmental regulatory framework. as far as mining, exploration and production is concerned, and specifically also of relevance to this presentation to the issuing or processing of environmental authorizations and applications in that respect. The environmental minister is also the appeal authority for those instances where the mineral resources minister makes the decisions. And all three ministers agreed to fix timeframes for the consideration and issuing of authorizations in terms of the respective legislation, which is NEMA, the Water Act, and the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act. You may have been aware of the amendment process, which is called the National Environmental Management Laws Amendment Act, and that process was recently concluded. Those provisions are not yet entered into effect, but it also provides for further mining-related alignment of provisions. And specifically, it introduces the term mining activity that then refers to the range of permits, permissions, and rights, and also consent that is required under the mineral legislation. And it also confirms the competency of the Mineral Resources Minister in respect of the implementation of the One Environmental System for mining. The Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment commented on the initial Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Bill as long ago as in 2019 and 2020, and we've had a couple of discussions with our counterparts in the Mineral Resources Department at the time. We had provided input, but unfortunately the most recent version of the bill was not then received subsequent to those engagements. And I think we've spoken a lot about unintended consequences, and we must highlight that there are some significant implications for environmental legislation, specifically the National Environmental Management Act, but also the subordinate legislation that is issued under that act as far as environmental impact assessment and financial provisioning is concerned, and then also the proposed legislation around hydraulic fracturing. So we've had new engagements with our counterparts in the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy during September this year. We had discussions around some issues of concern, and then there was general agreement that there are issues that still need to be resolved in the content of the bill, and a way forward was agreed to. Some of the potential aspects that we just want to bring to the attention of the committee was that there could be remaining issues of misalignment, and this deals specifically with the fact that currently the legislation talks about exploration and production and the rights and processes in respect of that under the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act. But this is now replaced with the petroleum right as a new term under the bill. As a principle, this is not problematic. It is just that there's no provision for the term petroleum right in any of our environmental legislation. And there's also no transition built into the bill to provide for this transition from the two terms to the one term in order to fill that gap. Also, the environmental requirements associated with petroleum exploration and production is, as according to the One Environmental System, to be provided and managed for in terms of the National Environmental Management Act, but there's still some provision for environmental requirements that could cause confusion and unintended consequences if those aspects of misalignment are not clarified. So we engaged with Department of Mineral Resources and Energy earlier this year. We obtained certain clarity on some of the aspects that we were not clear on, and we were brought to the understanding that the newly introduced petroleum right and the respective phases are similar to the current exploration right and production rights and the various phases of those rights as it is provided for in the current mineral legislation. We also then obtained some information and clarity around the provisions for drilling permits and permits to produce and conduct tests in the process. And in short, the gaps are that there is now, because of the new term petroleum right, no environmental authorization requirements in the environmental legislation. We refer specifically to the terms that are currently in the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act. This also means that the link between the environmental authorization requirement and the requirement to set financial provisioning is also lacking. And we were also taking note of the fact that there's a Petroleum Development and Environmental Committee that requires a number of representatives, amongst others, environmental representatives, to advise the DMRE minister. And one must maybe be mindful around guarding against any possible conflict of interest or duplication of processes if that is the case, because the role of that representative must then be clarified. If the petroleum right, the new term, is linked to the environmental authorization requirements of the National Environmental Management Act, it would automatically deal with these gaps. It would also mean that the environment minister will remain the appeal authority. And we've also seen some misalignment in terms of timeframes or the lack thereof in the bill, which we assume would be dealt with under regulation. But it may be necessary to consider the specific timeframes that are also set aside for these matters from an environmental perspective in order to ensure that the one environmental system and the agreement on fixed timeframes can still be honoured between the respective departments of mineral resources, energy, water and environment. In order to ensure that the environmental requirements are similarly addressed for the newly introduced petroleum right term, as is the case currently for exploration and production, we foresee that in future we would also need to effect amendments to our legislation, which may be it would definitely be the National Environmental Management Act, the Waste Act that also has aspects covered in relation to this theme, the Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations that deal specifically with activities that require environmental authorization, including exploration and production. And it would also need to amend the financial provisioning regulations. And just as a note to take note of this is that proposed amendments to these regulations were gazetted for comment, and comment closed recently at the end of August. So I think there's an opportunity there to engage on this and to fill the gap. Then the mining activity term has now been introduced in the National Environmental Laws Amendment Act. But this unfortunately now only refers to the existing Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act, and we would therefore need to provide for some transition so that the reading of that reference would be to the new term and the new bill once it comes into effect as an act. And in the Waste Act, the same reliance is prevalent. Then also the definition of holder, for instance, some of the other stakeholders have alluded to this, is also only referring obviously to the existing legislation, that some transition would be needed. So also to avoid confusion and unintended consequences, it would be preferable if the environmental requirements are dealt with in the environmental legislation and those are deleted from the bill. Also, just an important aspect to note is that even though this doesn't affect any changes to the protected areas regulatory regime, this act continues to prohibit commercial exploration and production and related activities in protected areas. In protected environments, which is a type of protected area, it's only allowed with the written permission of the Environment Minister, and in marine protected areas, it is also prohibited. Our proposals, we've agreed and had discussions with our counterparts in the Mineral Resources and Energy Department. The agreement reached in September was that there would be transitional provisions that they would be drafting with the assistance of the state law advisor that is assisting in this bill process. And it will try to fill the gaps as identified. We would be providing input from our side. We have received that wording from our colleagues, and we thank them for that. And we have provided our input to those provisions as well. And I think we would have to then engage with the state law advisor and the parliamentary legal advisor if that is necessary in order to explain some of the comments. So without spending too much time in addition to this, the transitional provisions, just to explain what the proposals would be, it would be to indicate in a generic manner that any reference to the existing terms, exploration and production, in legislation such as our own should be read as a reference to the newly created petroleum right that is introduced in this bill. And this would include all the relevant phases that is associated with those the terms and the phases of the petroleum right. And the same would be applicable for the financial provisioning requirements, which are quite essential. And the transitional provisions, we note that, and we know that it might not be sufficient to address all the gaps, but we do appreciate the wording that has been provided, and we have tried to improve on that by including some of our own comments to that, and we hope that it would go a long way in addressing these gaps that have been identified. Then our proposal would also be that there's a deletion of the environmental requirements and the environmental authorization references in the bill, and that these are just replaced with a generic provision to indicate that these matters are dealt with under the relevant environmental legislation. And it is also recommended that we look very carefully at timeframes, both in our own legislation and that in the bill or in subsequent prescribed regulation, to ensure that we can still coordinate and align the application processes for proponents who wish to come into the development of these aspects in complying with all the relevant legislation and running parallel processes. I'm just not going to read all of this wording, but this was the proposal, the initial proposal received from our colleagues at Mineral Resources and Energy with our input. We've just cleaned it up, but we have provided our input both in a clean version and in a track changes version to our colleagues in DMRE. And we do intend to ask that this wording be considered as far as the transition is concerned. And it does attempt to say that until such amendments are effected by ourselves to our environmental legislation, that we, and to the specific Environmental Management Act, which would be something like the Waste Act, or then the subordinate legislation issued in terms of those, that the provisions of this transitional provision will apply, and that would mean that a petroleum right or any reference to that in this bill, any reference to the exploration phase of the petroleum right must then be construed as a reference to the exploration right and the different phases of it in the current legislation, namely the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act. And likewise, that a reference to the production phase of the petroleum right must be construed as a reference to the production right and the different phases and terms that are currently provided for in the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act. Secondly, we also propose that for purposes of application of the National Environmental Management Act or any specific Environmental Management Act or the subordinate regulations issued under those acts, that the application of those applicable to reconnaissance permits, exploration rights and production rights required in terms of the mineral legislation, for those, the following principles will apply: that any reference in the mineral legislation in relation to these permits and rights must be construed as a reference to the permit and the relevant phases of the new petroleum right in terms of the bill, or if it is enacted, of the act then. And then also to ensure that the for purposes of implementation of this bill, that the environmental legislation determines who the responsible authority is for the implementation of the provisions of the environmental legislation as it relates to reconnaissance, exploration and production, and also that that environmental legislation will determine whether an environmental authorization is required for these activities or not. Potentially, there would also need to be a definition added for specific Environmental Management Act. We've noted that the definition of the National Environmental Management Act is already incorporated, but there may be an additional need for an additional definition to be added. Other matters are the new drilling permit and permit to produce and conduct tests in the petroleum right permit procedures. There would be implications of those for hydraulic fracturing and how that is regulated from an environmental perspective. And we will obviously consider how to engage on those proposed regulations and minimum information requirements that were published for comment, and the comment period have closed, but we've already noted that we would have to do some more work in this respect to ensure that there's alignment. And then as far as the Petroleum Development and Environmental Committee is concerned, regarding the environmental representative, we requested that there is consideration around whether it would pose potential conflict of interest or that there is duplication of existing processes that may need to be used in order to not add additional requirements, but also that this be considered by the colleagues when they consider any of the input made in this process. And that is the end of the presentation by the department. Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson, Honourable members, and other colleagues in the platform for your attendance. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, DFF. Who's next?
That concludes the presentation, Chair.
Oh. Okay. Honorable members, if that is the case, can you have a take? Any questions of clarity? Going one. Let me check whether, am I not alone here? Okay.
You're not alone, Chair. They're presenting their opinion. We are here. They are just telling us.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear your voices.
Yeah, we are here, Chairperson.
Thank you. In the absence of questions of clarity, let me then say this: I'm sure, honourable members, the reason that they are not asking questions of clarity, simply because there's still gonna be another process that is gonna be undertaken with regards to this bill. Yes, we take note of the issues that you have raised. That does not necessarily mean that we are in agreement. I can listen when I'm listening to your presentations. We come from different areas and from different perspectives. One thing I can assure you is that this exercise can't be just a tick box or compliance issue. I always say when we make legislation, we are dealing with the lives of the people. We are dealing with issues that affect most of our people in one way or the other. We need to balance all the interest that society generally is looking up to. No, we can't, we're not, because people are making, that's why we say you make presentations, no one responded to the other, because the presentation are in line with what each party feels to. It seeks to influence members of the portfolio committee. We can't stop different parties if they want to have bilaterals or engage each other. But here it is about addressing the portfolio committee on the issues and concerns that each component in society has. I don't want to say stakeholders, because sometimes people say, no, they are not a stake. If you're a stakeholder, sometimes it means you are on the table. You are a meal on the table. So we were taking cognizance of what members are saying. The only way you can, and I must say you can respond, is that from here, let's listen or engage with the administration of the committee in line with what then is going to be the next process. That next process is the public hearings. In those public hearings, we are now not dealing with stakeholders, but or with the individual organization or institutions. We are dealing directly with the public, which means directly with the communities. Organizations are allowed in those public hearings to mobilize or organize their own people, and even if it means prepare the submissions or presentations that they would want to make in the public hearings. Members have complained, or not say have raised concern in the past, and I think it's an issue that we will deal with when we go to the public hearings, that at times when these in the public hearings, people are making comments, they will repeat one and the same thing, even if they are 10 or 15, and you go there, they are saying one and the same thing. I always then say, for organizations that will be attending through as individually, or through individuals, because we're dealing with the public. When you do the public hearings, I always advise that each person will speak in a public hearing, because it is a bigger audience than this one. Each person must be given maybe 3 things that that person will talk to. Because we've got the inputs of all the parties that are here now that have made the oral submissions, you can then start to say on these issues without even making reference to the party, because that party is entitled to the view. But you can make reference on your own side that with regards to 1, 2, and 3, this is what we think has to happen. It then assists the members of the committee to have a much broader understanding of what could have been presented as a positive thing, and something can be raised as the flip side of it, or what is being raised as the flip side of what the act is saying must be understood in a particular context by the parties, by the members. And after those public hearings, then we will be able to sit down, do the consolidation of the public hearings, the information, including the one that relates to the oral submissions that have been made. So we will have that process. I can safely say that process of public hearing, in principle, we have agreed. Probably it will start next year, and when it starts next year, we will be traveling all the 9 provinces. The issue that we just need to finalize is is areas and specific venues that we'll be attending to. That is why I was saying that probably in our meeting on the 29th, we will be able to finalize the program even on for the first quarter and the public hearings, and we encourage people. We don't have to agree, we don't have to disagree. You just have to use and utilize those platforms, including now, to influence the process of policy development with regards to the legislative process. That's what we want to encourage. Express your views, engage us as members of parliament. I always say that the mere fact that we are members of parliament does not mean that we possess natural wisdom. We were just lucky that out of all the hands that were raised, some of the hands were raised in favor of us, and that's the only privilege that we are having. But we must then be prepared and be open to engagements, to be influenced, and we must accept that in some cases people will disagree with us. But lastly, and I think it's important to say to yourselves as you make these submissions, this is a proposed bill that comes from the department. I know even when we go to the public hearings, we will be confronted by the same thing. People say, you are saying this for now, this committee has got no views on the bill until it would have conducted even the public hearings. It would have been given back to the department on what is their take on the oral submissions as well as the public hearings. Then it will be able to deliberate on those that consolidated and then prepare its response. So this is for now not a bill of the committee. This is a bill that is proposed by the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. I know there's always that confusion. People sometimes think that a committee of parliament is the department. We are not a department. We can't represent the department. The department is making this proposal. We've got a possibility, which is very high, to disagree with some or even with many of the aspects of what the bill is proposing. And therefore, I will appeal and request that from here, let's constructively engage even at the level of at a community level or at a public level where we go and undertake those particular exercises. On that note, let me yes, there's nothing wrong to submit. That's what I said. But besides submitting more, I'm encouraging that you attend public hearings. You are not going to say, no, you made this submission, but try and spread yourself to be as much constructive as possible. For instance, if we go there and say you are giving a person 5 minutes, you can spread that 5 minutes to 20 by having 4 people, each one speaking on a specific section or a specific chapter of what the bill talks to. In that way, you are able to influence and counteract some of the issues that were raised. Like I said, obviously, you don't have to say Mr. Luzipo's organization when it says this. No. It's just a question of saying, with regards to this particular matter, we understand that there are views that says this. We just want to bring to your attention that contrary to what is being raised with regards to this, just look at this other aspect of it. And as I said, that we are not going to be telling you that, no, you came for oral submissions. You are allowed in the public hearings to come and re-emphasize, if you feel so, the issues that you would have raised here. But like I said, that even there we may have limited time, but that time will be given to every member of the public who will be in attendance. So keep in touch with the committee. You can interact with the 2 secretaries of the committee when the program is finalized. As I said, by the 29th, we will have finalized the public hearing. Even if we don't have venues, for an example, in the Western Cape, you will know which areas we will be going to and how many of those areas will be attending. Subsequent to that, you can see Mr. Langa, his load said that he's doing everything possible to be seen. Now, we will.
Apologies, sir. Apologies.
No, don't worry. You are, at least we see that it's you. It's not someone who was imitating to be you in the meeting. So every area of those 9 provinces, we are choosing at least a minimum of 3. We will be choosing a minimum of 3 districts. We may not have the specific venues, but like I say, you will definitely know by the 29th when we finalize the program. On that note, honorable members, can I declare the meeting adjourned? And thank you very much for your attendance. Let's meet on this matter when we attend to the public hearings. The meeting is declared adjourned.
Sure, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, bye.
Leaders.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.